This is a task that we did in the Xavier University in Cincinnati, working in an initiative where we were collecting the main regulatory guidance and practices just in a document. So please feel free if you are interested in that. It's free, it's open source, and it is in a website where I can redirect later on. But believe me, the spectrum, the regulatory spectrum is really, really huge. So how to measure which is the most important one, which is the way to interact with regulatory interactions? Well, let me introduce some of them, because I highlighted that between all of the principles and guidelines that we need to commit with, I would like to highlight some of them that I think that is so crucial to have in mind. First of all, the non-clinical safety evaluation of reformative drug products. Why this is important? Well, in this case, in this guidance, there are a lot of reference regarding toxicology studies. Do you remember that I said before that when you are submitting documentation for a new drug, the regulatory bodies, they are looking with more attention, they pay more attention to the toxicology results? Well, in this case, we have a very good reference, very good practices in order to submit something viable, something with very good perspectives regarding toxicology. I advise to read this one because it's really interesting for this topic. On the other one, as if we are thinking in CRO or CDMO, probably we have to lead with the good clinical practices. In this case, this guidance for good clinical practices is something that should be the 10 commandments, let me say, the 10 commandments for any CRO, CDMO. Here you will see that we need to not only control the data as a good clinical practice, also how we are managing the data related to physical equipments, how we're managing raw materials, how we're managing the relationship with suppliers, how you are validating your suppliers. All these kind of topics that you have to manage in lab are gathered in this guidance. And as part of the same principle, this reflection paper for laboratories that they are offering analysis and evaluation for clinical trial samples, this is a very, very good reference to have. In this case, they are describing topics like how to distribute the sample depending on which kind of targets we're looking for in the drug preparation. But we have more. For example, what happens with the non-clinical safety evaluation in terms of immunotoxic. Again, the toxicology is so critical. What happens when we talk about biologics? So this guidance is so good in these terms. We were talking also about the viabilities or the bioequivalence with the drug repurposing, also with new drug application or with investigational new drug application. This guidance is so good also for this topic. Probably all of them, they are familiar for you, but just in case, I think that this is a good summary, to work with. Well, regarding the chromatographic method, I think that in this case, this guidance for validation of chromatographic methods is so good, but not only for chromatographic methods. It's so good for others. Spectroscopy, for Raman, for near infrared, all these kind of technologies can be applied from a regulatory perspective. If we generalize, if we try to extrapolate the procedure that this guidance is providing, is offering, we can extrapolate that to the rest of methodologies, and it's so good. So if you are based on that, probably you won't have any problem with the FDA. The other one is, what about the validation of analytical procedures? Another topic that is so critical. You need to validate everything, any action that you do in your process as an analytical procedure. And there is a specific methodology to that. So we need to be standard. This is very important, because when you talk to your contractor, you need to talk the same language. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. So the syntax, the lexic the grammar is already there. So we need to take this grammar, apply this grammar, and apply these procedures to our systems. And we need to be standard. And much standard you are, more easier will be the task in order to relate with the regulatory bodies and also with the contractors. In this case, I would like to highlight these three ones, the GCPs, the good clinical practices, the good laboratory practices, and the good manufacturing practices. The last one, only if you think in the CDMO or the CMO possibility. But also we have to think about the ISO, the PIC, the ACH. Well, in terms of good clinical practices, well, it's important to have these audit checks. So these 3 bullet points that I highlighted here is the, let me say, is the lemma that FDA is pursuing in terms of GCPs. So we need always to protect the participants. In terms of GCP, remember, we are talking about stage 1 of research development, clinical trials, preclinical trials. We need always to preserve the safety of the participants. And as much as you can delegate these practices into silico, you will be better received from the FDA if you are properly covering the target of your study, because you are reducing the impact on participants. This is something that is very well received from the regulatory authorities when you are demonstrating how much valuable is the in silico research that you are doing, trying to remove, for example, adverse effects. And the perception of your submission is better than another submission that is fully based on human participants. The other one is how you are able to assure the quality and validity of the study. So that means that it's not only in terms of pharmacogenetics or in terms of analytics or metabolics. That means that you are assuring the full procedure that you have followed internally. So no transcription of data. So data is always guaranteed end to end, since the data was introduced in the system till the data was consumed for analytical processes. Everything is under control, and no human interaction that could violate in some way or could alter the validity of this data is introduced. Very, very important. From the warning letters that we have, there is a huge percentage of warning letters that are due to human alteration of data. That happens a lot in the last year, for example, in China. There are many warning letters. If you can read, this is an open database that you can access, and you can check how many warning letters the FDA opened to China CDMOs because they altered data. As much transparent you are with data, more well received you will be, and your brand will be more recognized. Okay. Also, if you can you can create and apply protocols for conduct the clinical research process internally in your lab. So every time that you based your procedures in the standards, that will be also a good check in the checklist that well, the audits will do. And finally, I think that it's very important, this comment: sponsors are responsible for all outsourced clinical trial activities such as CROs. So remember, when you go to the authorities, you should be well aligned with your contractor, with the strategies that you have already proposed. This is very, very important. When you are establishing a relationship with your contractor, if you talk in terms of CROs, you have the freedom, let me say, to establish how to do the things. So you are the responsible of which kind of procedure you want to apply. And you need to demonstrate that your procedures are the best one, and they will accelerate, and they will be a value for your contractor. But if you are a CMO, not a CDMO, if you're a CMO, the procedures will come with the contractor, and you need to be compliant with the guidance and the SOPs and all the quality aspects that the contractor is bringing with the drug that they want to produce in your facilities. I don't know how many of you are thinking in CROs, how percentage they are thinking in CDMOs and CMOs. Okay, when we are not committing with the impact study in terms of quality or validity, if we are missing some part in our quality aspects regarding data security, privacy, results, analysis, all these kind of things requires to be validated. If we have any kind of gap that is missing, that will be a non-conformity directly. Okay. And we're lucky because everything is already documented. So we have not to rethink again everything. It's already documented, and we have to just to double check that we are complying and we are committing with all the things that are already requested. Okay. Okay, so here we have a highlight to avoid contamination, documentation on the setup, cleanliness on the testing environment. These kind of things are the major concerns of the FDA regulators. Okay. The China comment that I did before is regarding the documentation because they were manipulating manually this documentation and making transcriptions with some errors in the process. And finally, the GMPs. I put this red C because the GMPs, this is only applicable if you want to be a CDMO or CMO. This GMP is evolving very quickly, and for the reason they added this C, is the current good manufacturing practices, because, well, we have an update and a review very often, and in order to be sure that we are always committed with the last version, they added this C, current GMPs. Well, in this case, which is the most important deficiencies, and we need to change the concept of deficiencies and transform these deficiencies in opportunities. Well, the thing is that usually, or the pharmaceutical industry doesn't want to sacrifice revenue in terms of modernization of the equipment, revalidation of the equipment, or the stability of the organization that they have. For this reason, they are delegating continuously, and in the last years, they're delegating the manufacturing processes into CDMOs and CMOs because they prefer to invest that in another business. Well, the thing is that we need to demonstrate from a CDMO and CMO perspective these pre-approval products and also the post-approval products. Pharmaceutical companies need to demonstrate that they have the production under control. This control can be demonstrated in different ways, but you need to demonstrate that to the specific FDA official or to the regulatory authorities. Usually in Europe and also in the US, they are following the rule of the 3 consecutive batches. Once they demonstrate that the 3 batches consecutively that they have produced for a specific product has been produced with expected yield and expected safety, efficiency, and quality, they are ready to be, the 4th batch could be marketized. This is the famous rule of the 3 consecutive batches. The thing is that this is not written in any place coming from the authorities. This is a rule that the pharmaceutical industry invented. But before these 3 batches, they have thrown to the trash many batches because they need to make this. We're talking about millions of dollars thrown to the trash because they need to do that. Well, in terms of GMP, when you demonstrate that you have a lot of knowledge in terms of science, you don't need to throw to the trash hundreds of batches, and even more. You need to be profitable as a CDMO and CMO. So as much science you apply at the beginning, you can be more profitable in the product, in the production of the product. And it's important, I split these interactions in 3 main columns, trying to summarize between GCP, good clinical practices, all those activities related with preclinical and clinical phases. With GLP, good laboratory practices, that means research and development, product development, analytics, and so on. And CGMP, remember the C lowercase c is current good manufacturing processes if you are thinking on a CDMO option. Well, clinical, preclinical, clinical, research, development in lab, and manufacturing. In this case, I split the table in different rows, and we can start from top to down. And the first one should be, who is the responsible for the study supervision? Well, the thing is that, and we are lucky on this topic, CDMOs and CMOs and CROs, they are not the final responsible, never, for the final outcome that they are producing. The final responsible is always the sponsor. So if a contractor is is subcontracting your services, they are the final legal responsibles and the legal owners of everything that could happen. This is good from a responsibility perspective, but that means that there is a commitment between both actors, contractor, sponsors, and subcontractor. That means that you will be in a very good position when you are able to establish this reliable interaction, this transparent commitment between both actors. So nowadays, usually in the conversations that I has been invited signing this kind of contracts, sponsors or contractors and subcontractors, they are not talking about a contract of business relationship. They are talking about partnerships. They are talking about this kind of relationship where they are not just considering economical transactions. They need or they prefer to talk about partnerships. They prefer to talk about reliability and conjunction, convergence of interests. And this is the vision that I would like to transmit to you. In this case, although the supervision and the final legal responsibility is always in the contractor and the sponsor side, you can see a lot of value when you are able to provide more services on this sense. For example, regarding the preclinical or clinical phases, we have to know that the quality assurance must be a separate unit from the subgroup or the team in the CRO or the CDMO that they are executing physically the study. So they need to keep independence between the supervisor, the audit, and the executor. This is an amazing opportunity to work in hubs, like in Cuba, you are considering to have different companies being part of the same consortium, or considering even more, considering two different locations in the world where they are completely separate and they are delegating different responsibilities during the process. One specialized in quality assurance and the other one executing the clinical phases. So with this distance, with this separation, physical separation, you are adding a nice value to the sponsors. Well, the same happens when we talk about facilities. Well, the thing is that the facilities, depending on which kind of service you want to provide, there are different levels of interaction that they are explicitly mentioned in the regulatory laws or regulatory requirements. For example, in terms of clinical and preclinical, we have to know that, well, you have to demonstrate that your facility must be adequate in order to control and gather all the needs for the study that you're proposing. But lighting, plumbing, the washing facility, all this kind of infrastructure are not gathered, are not covered in the GCP, neither in the GLP, but they are required for GMP. But if you add these non-included requirements by law, if you are including these requirements as part of your added value, you are nicer than other contractors. So this is an added value that, for example, CDMOs or CMOs, when they have a facility that they are, all the facilities GMP compliant, they are offering the same services and the same infrastructure to the rest of the services, they have an added value. So the facility also counts, is really important. Regarding the equipment, well, the equipment in terms of GCPs must be adequate, of course, but in the GLP case, we need to know that data is crucial. Data coming from the equipment is crucial. You cannot afford any conclusion. You cannot produce any outcome in the studies that you are delivering to your sponsor if the equipment has not been properly calibrated. So that means that if you have the possibility to establish a good relationship with scales, chromatographs, spectrometers, all these kind of equipment suppliers, in order to be calibrated continuously, or in order to have the calibration plan automatically established and offered by third parties companies, you are proposing a very good solution for this nightmare that usually happens. You cannot rely on data produced by equipment that has not been calibrated. And this is something that we have to have in mind. Regarding the SOPs, the standard operations, well, in the law, in the good practices, in the good clinical practices, is described that only a qualified person can approve, can design, can write down these SOPs, the standard operation procedures, in clinical and preclinical, and the same in GLP when you're making the analysis and you're in research and development. So what does it mean? If you offer this possibility and you have already these SOPs very well established and demonstrated that they work, this is a time that you are saving to your customer. So this is very important. Well, in case of the protocols that you are following, even the protocols, for example, for the GCP, they are overriding even the SOP. So they are so critical. In this case, both the sponsor and also the study director, they have to commit with these protocols. Again, if you are able to deliver these protocols and they are very well aligned with the SOPs, you are adding value to your services. More things in terms of responsibilities and good practices, GXP, let me say, clinical, laboratory, and manufacturing. Well, regarding the master schedule, so crucial. So it's only applicable for CROs and CDMOs when we're working about clinical and preclinical phases. In this case, all the indexes and plans and schedules that you have established in order to commit with the planning for the study execution must be always maintained by the quality assurance unit. So they will do the audit, they will do the execution, and they will do also the review and the review. That means that this service, that is a huge service that people is looking for, can be part of the portfolio of services that you can provide. Well, now we are arriving to one of the critical topics. What happens with data? In this case, we're talking about records and reports. They are so different if we talk about in GCP or we talk about GLP. In the case of the GCP, we have to be aware that if a process, a life cycle of a drug in the early stages, we can spend more or less between 10 and 12 years. Well, the thing is that we need at least to keep all those documentation at least 5 years following the date of the registration. 5 years. So if you are planning to be a CRO, and you have to be aware about which kind of, how many customers do you want to plan to assist, to attend, because you will need to manage all this information. You will need to keep this information. And that doesn't mean just storing the papers and the folders in our house and that's all. No. That means that one thing, you need to demonstrate that the place where you are storing this documentation is safe enough in order to guarantee these 5 years of access to the documentation. And even more, if you demonstrate that you are not working in paper, you are not paper-based, if you demonstrate that you're paperless, that is easiest for your customer to make audits. And if you remember the cycle, do you remember that we were describing the sequence of the workflow of the life cycle for the drugs, preclinical, clinical, and so on? We insist that we should see the sequence not in a transversal, not in a linear way. We have to think in a virtuous loop. In the middle, we have this core, we have this hub where we are integrating this information in order to add knowledge to the rest of sequence of steps. This is the best way to allocate these records and reports produced during the GCP. Because we will see later, we will see that this documentation that you are generating will be very highly valuable for the next iteration, for the next project. So in each iteration that you do with a project, with the same customer or a different customer, that doesn't matter. You can extract lessons learned. You can extract drawbacks, failures. At the end, you need to learn from your experience, and in each iteration, you need to be more efficient. This is the only way that you can be competitive in the market regarding the top big pharma companies that they are so slow. Okay, so if you consider to have this documentation, digital documentation, and you can demonstrate continuous backup, encryption, security, access, and also the final removal of the documentation when the period of time has been expired, you are in a very good position. In the case of the GLP, we were talking about at least 2 years after the last approval of a marketing application. So this is the point. And in case of the GMP, all the batch records, all the batch reports that you are producing, all the in-process control, all the laboratory analysis controls that you are doing during the manufacturing process must be recorded at least 1 year following product expiration date. And that means many years. So I think that it's clear that it doesn't make sense to work with paper. And all the CXOs that nowadays they are still working in paper, they are not competitive. Okay. Let me say another topic that is not here, but I think that it's important to mention, is that at least in Europe, it's required by law that once the information that we have generated and we have kept during the legal time of period must be removed. And is the CDMO or the CXO or the pharma company that is producing this documentation, it's required, it's mandatory to delete, completely remove all the information. In the US, it's not required, but in the in the Europe, it does. Regarding the CAPA systems, I think that this is something that is having more value every day. In this case, we're talking about corrective actions, preventive actions. They are not required in GCP. They are not required in GLP. Of course, they are required in the good manufacturing practices. Well, the thing is that if you are thinking to bring services also in the GMP sphere, in the manufacturing ecosystem, you can apply the same principles that you are doing in the GMP, in the manufacturing processes, in order to analyze potential corrective actions in front of issues that could arise, and also preventive actions in order to avoid that they happen again. Well, the thing is that when you are providing this CAPA analysis or these CAPA procedures to your customers, although they are not required, they are looking at you like a mature provider, because you are doing the same that you do in the later phases of the manufacturing application. And this is so good because if you have an issue and you don't do a CAPA analysis, this issue will be forever and ever in the records, but no one will learn from that. But for you, you need to change the vision of an issue and transform this issue in an opportunity in order to learn which was the root cause of this problem, how you can prevent, and don't do or don't apply the same no good practices, the current practices that provoke this problem again. This is a high value nowadays in the discussions that they are happening between sponsors and CMOs and CDMOs. Well, now let me put a little bit of focus in the M of the CXO. Probably, I don't know how much interest are you into bring services also in manufacturing, but I think that it's important to mention here because nowadays is a real value that a lot of companies are identifying. The thing is that we saw that in the workflow, in the life cycle of the drug, starting from discovery and going to the post-market safety monitoring, this is step 5. In the middle, between the step 4 and the step 5, we have a huge band that we have not went deeply. This is the manufacturing processes, where we have a lot of regulations and examples about how to manage that. Well, the thing is that if we take just the 21 CFR 211 section, that is the most related with the manufacturing operations regarding laboratory control, production records reviews, and so on, we can see that in this pie chart, we have the distribution of deviations found by the FDA only for the US pharmaceutical manufacturers, how they are split between the different chapters of this regulatory guidance. Well, if we put the attention on the bottom, we can see that practically the majority of problems that the US deviations are producing are related to quality systems. So the quality system is something that the pharma companies, they put in place because they decide to do that in their way. So the quality system is nothing more than their own standard operation procedures, their own protocols. And they are failing in the rules that they themselves they are establishing. And they are failing on that. Also in the laboratory control, this is more related with calibration and with data integrity issues. Production systems and at the end facility, because for example, purified water, airflows, laminar airflows, vacuum conditions are gathered in this purple section. But it's so interesting to see how pharmaceutical companies are failing in the main principle of their own procedures that they define. For this reason, CXO are becoming more attractive for pharmaceutical companies, because in the pharma companies, they have procedures applied, specified for very specific products and actions and tasks delivered during the full process. But in the CDMOs and the CXO, they are repeating, they have a continuous iteration of all their procedures for different customers, for different aspects of the production or for the workflow, for different situations. That means that the CXO option are more robust than their own pharma companies. For the reason the CXO are also very good accepted by not only by the pharma community, as we saw in the statistics and in the news, also for the regulatory bodies. The regulatory bodies, they think, or they are considering CXO as a very good way to produce drugs in a more safety way. Well, we saw data, it seems that it's crucial, but please don't try to create your own format for to maintain the content. There is a lot of already in place standards that you can reuse. in order to manage, for example, clinical and preclinical content. Or if you want to manage hospitalary information, there is a standard that the name is HL7. Or if you want to export between sites the batch information when you're in manufacturing. In this case, you have the batch ML standard. So there are a standard for everything, So the clinical trial registry. So there is another standard. So there are many standards that they are already in place. They have been adapted, and they have been proved that it works. So it's important to take a look in the horizon where we are working in order to don't reinvent the wheel, also because it's the standard language that we can use with our sponsors. And again, data integrity. If you remember that yesterday I mentioned how much difficult it is for the pharmaceutical industry to guarantee quality on data, and not only extracting data, also maintaining data. Well, traditionally, the pharmaceutical industry has grown up in an organic way. So they created layers and layers. We will see that at the end of the session today. They are working in different data silos. So MES for manufacturing, LIMS for laboratory. They are working with warehouse management system with their own software. They have their own systems and they are efficient in islands. They are not good when they have to share this knowledge or this information in order to convert this information into knowledge. They are not good on that. And this is maybe the better reflection of this thought. This is the number of warning letters year around the world, only in the US, related to data integrity, because humans are interacting with the data. Humans are manipulating the data because data has been transcribed, because it's necessary to replicate the data between different systems. Many reasons. So you can see that the number of warning letters are going up only with data integrity deficiencies. This is so important. And here, when we have a warning letter coming from the FDA, well, we have to fix the problem. We have to negotiate with the FDA. But the most important problem for a pharmaceutical industry, you know, which is the most important problem, is the marketing, the reputation in front of the community. One warning letter is around $1 million of cost, just cleaning the reputation, not only working in the fixing problem and repairing the consequence, just talking about reputation. So if the pharmaceutical industry can delegate this responsibility into CXO, that they have a lot of experience managing complexity, data coming from different customers, different products, different formats at the same time, this is good for them because they can dedicate their efforts to those things that they can bring benefits to the company. New drugs, new formats, new vision. So it seems that this kind of reasons are also supporting the hypothesis about why CXO are more attractive. Finally, it's just a recall. If you remember, in the other workshop that we did, I used this same slide. I like a lot this slide because in one hand we have the FAIR principle. The FAIR principle, if you like the AI world, this FAIR principle is a very old term. This principle is coming from the 50s, in the past millennium, where good data scientists define that data that we are using for AI purposes and for data purposes in general must be always findable, because otherwise you are working in silos and information is another island, must be always accessible. And that means that it's not free or open access. We're talking about accessible by role, by profile, by access rights. So that means accessible. This is the concept of the key that this guy is handing. Must be interoperable. So that means that the format that you decide to work with in the data, please try to think that must be used for other departments, for other sections, maybe for other labs, other companies, or maybe other countries. So the data must be modular and adapted to other systems. So importable, they need to be exported, they need to be imported, and they need to be graphicked, they need to be analyzed. So these kind of things are so important. And for example, if you think in a proprietary system that is a binary and hidden system, no one would be able to work with the same data. And finally, reusable. Reusable, this is key from a CXO perspective. The reusable topic is the one that will allow you to be efficient and to be more attractive for your sponsors, because this is the only way that you have in order to be better in every single iteration. So you can reuse the outputs and the outcomes from the previous iteration for the next one. Imagine that you are working with different products from different customers, but you are using the same facilities, you are using the same criteria, the same personnel, the same digital tools, whatever you use, you're reusing that. This is the secret of the business, no? You are offering for different customers their own outcomes with the same facilities. Well, you can interact and you can iterate in a more efficient way when you are able to reuse the knowledge that you can extract step by step. Well, the thing is that these principles that they are applicable for data science, for data, for digital information, recently, some years ago, I think 8 years ago already, the WHO proposed this other acronym, the ALCOA, attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, and accurate. Well, the thing is that when you are committing with the 5 attributes, you can lead to a good data integrity policy. Well, believe me, if you include this data integrity concept with the FAIR principle in your soul, in your essence of the value that you are offering to your sponsors, you are in a very competitive position in regards other CXO that they are not doing that because they are paper-based, because they are creating silos, because they are not reusing data coming from the same customer. For many, many reasons, you are providing a best scoring in the checklist that your sponsors will execute.